Hello VC, it's Steve Whitty here with another video. It's Sunday morning. This is the sun is shining. All is good in the world. Well, in my world anyhow. As I said, this is another video. It's a recent listens video, number 12. I've got 13 albums to show you, which are in the punk, post-punk, new wave vein. I've been lucky with some pickups recently, where I've got some really good classic albums of that genre. Sort of highlighting on really a couple of bands really, but as I move along the video, you'll get to see what albums I've picked up. So, without further ado, because I've got a feeling this might be a long video, and I've got my notes here, so I've just got to keep referring back. First album I'm going to show you is an upgrade, and this is the debut album from The Clash, released in 1977. The album itself was recorded at a cost of £4,000 over a 3-week period, and this is regarded as one of the great punk albums of all time. The songs themselves, mainly Jones and Mick Jones and Joe Strummer compositions, were composed in Mick Jones' grandma's flat. That's where he was living at the time. And what the beauty of this album was that, probably unlike a lot of their predecessors, a lot of their contemporaries in the punk movement, they weren't afraid really to highlight their influences. The whole punk thing was supposed to be this year zero and everything starts again. But I think what highlighted it was the fact that reggae was a big part of their Strummer and Paul Simmonson's life, and the cover of the Junior Murvin Police and Thieves was featured so highly. Other tracks on here, you got Janie Jones just opens this album, a great album opener. I'm so bored with the USA, White Riot, Deny. It's a particular favourite of mine on the album. Career Opportunities, Garage Land. It's just a stonking rock album, actually. This eventually got released in the US, but this was the second album to be released by The Clash in the US, and it was released in 1979, totally different to what was released in the UK. The band was pretty much cemented its lineup, but on drums, Terry Chimes was the drummer on the album, and he left after the recording, and he's got credited as Tory Crimes. I think there was a bit of I don't know if it was a falling out or whether they weren't happy he left. I mean, obviously they got Top Head in on drums afterwards. Terry Chimes did rejoin the band when Top Hedden got sacked in '82, and drummed on that tour. Next album I'm going to show you is again by The Clash. This is Sandinista, their triple album, released in 1980. This really. The band decided to do a triple album really as a sort of two fingers up to the record company. They weren't really impressed with the double album, London Calling, and really on the back of the success of that. This album features all sorts of genres. It's an absolute mixed bag of, funk, reggae, jazz, gospel, rockabilly, folk, dub, rhythm and blues, calypso, disco, and rap. It's all on here. The songwriting credits had changed from Jones and Strummer to the Clash, and this is partly due to the payment, the price that the Clash had to pay for releasing the triple album was that they didn't got any royalties for the first 200,000 copies, and then the rest of the royalties was 50% down on normal. So it's obviously the thought that just share the royalties out with the band. As the album goes, you got Magnificent Seven, Hits for UK, Somebody Got Murdered. These are favourite tracks on here. Police on My Back. Call Up. Now, it could be argued whether a triple album was too much, and probably in hindsight, listening to it, if it was done now, you could get a double album out of this, and I think you could. There's some tracks that go on there, like School Children Singing Career Opportunities, while cute. Maybe I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, then having said that, and I'm sort of conflicted by this, it actually means that you take away the essence of the album. So maybe triple album is right. Does fit for this album as a triple album, but maybe now I think somebody would look at it and probably would cull quite a few of the tracks. And I suppose the consequence of this was Combat Rock, which was released in 1982. The fifth album, and it was the last album to feature Topper Heading and Mick Jones. This is their best-selling album, and it's mainly due on the back of the hit singles Rock the Casbah and Bank Robber. Now, Bernie Rhodes had come back into the fold as managing the band on the request of Strummer and Simonson. And he suggested that they get Glyn Johns involved, top producer, and I think his role really was to sort of like weed the album out down to a palatable single album. Mick Jones wanted a double album based off of dance remixes, while the rest of the band really wanted a single album. And Johns, I think, helps produce this. It's certainly a commercial sounding record. Might go against the grain what they wanted, but I think it helped drag some of the money back in. Should I Say, Should I Go eventually became a #1 single. It was a top hit single in '82, but then on the back of a jeans advert became a #1. Rock the Casbah, Straight to Hell, which is just a masterful track. Yeah, I think in a sense it's I think a very good commercial sounding rock record in my view. Let's have a quick slurp. Next album I'm going to show you is, I've managed to pick up a copy of Boys Don't Cry, The Cure. Now, this was released in the US in 1980, and this is on, if I can get it out, the PVC label. And it's basically, it's obviously the title track was known, best known track on the album, but it's sort of like culled from the Three Imaginary Boys album and other material released in between 78 and 79. As I said, the title track's best known. This eventually did get a UK release, but no, so this is sort of more a completist. I mean, it's not in great shape, but I was pleased to pick it up. I haven't got that much Cure on vinyl, so I was happy to pick that up. Next album is The Damned, second album, Music for Pleasure, released in 1977. The Damned at this point had added Lou Edmonds as a second guitarist, and sort of expanding the sound. And originally the band wanted Syd Barrett to produce the album because he declined them. I think they got in touch, he declined them. He didn't really want to know. So in the end, second best, they got Nick Mason to produce the album. And I think the reaction to this album was very poor, but it was received poorly in comparison to the debut album, Damned. Problem Child was the best known track. It was the single off the album. They tried to add saxophone into the album, and I think it just reflects it's just a mishmash. It wasn't #1 producer who, in the best will in the world, wasn't really used to the punk new wave scene, and the band pretty much split up soon afterwards. It was the last album they recorded on Stiff. By the time they reformed, they'd moved on to Chiswick Record, where they recorded Machine Gun Etiquette. Yeah, so I'm pleased to have got it, Definitely not one of the best albums. Next album is Public Image Limited 2nd edition. Now, this was released in 1980. Initially, if you're not all aware, that the second album was Metal Box, which was released in 1979, which was 3 12-inch singles housed in a metal box. There was only a limited run on these, so they decided to release 2nd edition, which condensed the album which actually transferred the 3 12-inches into a double album. This album, you see the band moving towards a avant-garde sound, which was more to Lydon's liking, I think. His musical tastes are at best very eclectic. I think what comes out of this was the musicianship improved, jar wobbles, bass lines, Keith Levine's guitar. Couple of tracks. Swan Lake was originally released as Def Disco in the UK as a single, which is basically as it was Swan Lake. Now, this was written by Lydon about his mother's dying of cancer, and he wrote it sort of like about the whole process. He actually apparently played it to her before, not while she was on her deathbed. She apparently liked it. Then again, mothers do say that. Other great tracks on here: Memories, Pop Tones. This is a classic post-punk album. The shift from the debut album is just it's chalk and cheese in my opinion. But it just makes it's just a great album. So I was so pleased to pick this up. I mean, that album, actually on the same day as I picked that up, there was a guy had brought the actual metal box, and my budget didn't run to that. Saying that, I suppose if it came up, I might buy it and sell that. I don't know. It's one of those. I think the metal boxes now are all a bit beat up, so I'm not sure about the state of the records. Right, moving on. Next 4 albums are by, or the first 4 albums by a band that was a favourite of mine at the time, Susie and the Banshees. Debut album, Scream, released in 1978. Susie and the Banshees were probably the last of the known punk bands on the London circuit to get a record deal. They eventually signed to Polydor. Susie Sue, born Susan Ballion, and Stephen Severin, Stephen Bailey, were part of the Bromley contingent, along with William Broad, Billy Idol. And I think they suffered a bit because they were struggling with, I don't know, maybe the ability to play. They very much were amateurs that picked up instruments and went along with it. The first gig was at the London Club Punk Festival in 1976, which featured Marco Peroni on guitar and Sid Vicious on drums. But as it got on, they improved, and John Mackay and Kenny Morris eventually became a settled lineup. They'd had a hit single with Hong Kong Garden, and they got around to recording the album. Now, this was recorded in a week and mixed in 3 weeks. J.G. Ballard and William Burroughs provide influence really for the lyrics. This is really about suburbia and about places where they grew up. I think the song it's pretty highlighted with Suburban Relapse, which is really much about places where they visit frequently when as growing up. A lot of angst and annularity in the album. This is just a really classic album. It got to number 12 in the UK. See what other tracks are on here. I love Metal Postcard. It was released as a limited edition single, Mittergarten. And then I think what else is on here? Pure. Mirage, that's another favourite of mine. That's a bit. I got to know that track originally when on the Once Upon a Time compilation. So I brought all. This is just wonderful album. So pleased to pick this up. this will go in. And then they followed that up with the second album, Join Hands, released in 1979. This is, on whole, a much darker album than Scream. The band themselves were sort of inspired by what was going on at the time. 1979 was not a very good year. In the UK, we were having strikes, piles of rubbish in bins. Rubbish was not being collected, so rubbish was piling up in the streets, rats running around. If you died in 1979, you were lucky to be buried. The grave diggers were on strike. And then events were going on in the rest of the world, like the Iran Revolution, and news images were showing people actually being killed, which was a bit of a first, so it was very bleak. And this also drew them into World War One. World War One is really primarily an influence on this album. The opening track, Poppy Day, is based on the poem by John McCrae, In a Flanders Field. And you've got the image on the cover there, and you've got the poppy. In fact, if I show the record, it might help a bit more. So you've got on the record label sort of image of poppies there. This, you could argue, it was the birth of goth. The single off the album, Playground Twist. John McKay's flanged guitar just is all over that track, and it's a very dark single. As I said, the whole album's very dark. You got the track "Mother, Oh My Papa," which is sort of an adaptation of the German children's song "Oh My Papa." Lord's Prayer closes this album, which was a song they played at the first gig at the 100 Club. In fact, it was the only song they played. It was during the mixing that McKay and Morris became very withdrawn from the band, were hardly involved, and they were very unhappy with how everything was going on. I think they felt isolated, and this culminated in a big row. They had on the eve of the tour to promote this album. There was a record store signing, I think in Aberdeen or something like that, and they had a pair of them had a public row with Susie and Severin, and walked out. And I think they had to get Budgie on drums, and Robert Smith of The Cure, who was supporting the band, had to learn the set list. Another problem they had was with the cover. They originally wanted to have a picture of a Holy Communion card, which was Kenny Morris had done, and last minute it got pulled. So I think much at the manager's insistence that this would be a better album, and I think it does. This is a better album cover. It reflects the starkness of the album, just the four soldiers just standing there, nothing, no other image on the white. It's just absolutely wonderful cover. So that album was fraught, the tour was fraught, and after the end of the tour, Susie Sue ended up being hospitalised, and she ended up having to, I don't know if it's tuberculosis or something like that, TB or something like that, or hepatitis, something with the chest. She had to take a month off, but you put that to good use, because she ended up learning how to play the guitar, the rudiments of the guitar, which meant that she could start actually composing, and the fruits of that was the third album, Kaleidoscope, released in 1980. Chart-wise, I think this was a successful album that reached number 5. But at this point, Budgie had become a full-time member. But then, probably the masterstroke of this was recruiting John McGeoch on guitar. The musical direction had changed. Susie Sue had said that it's almost like it was a new band when the new members had come. However, McGeoch had joined. I don't know whether it was contractual or whatever, because he joined from magazine. He doesn't appear on any of the artwork. Got a rumbly tummy there. Um, the hit singles off here, Happy House and Christine. Happy House, just a wonderful McGeoch riff in there. But synths, drum machines, and electronic music have become an influence. This track Red Light is very much an electro dance mix, and Lunar Camel, it's almost like a synth based track as well. It's just a wonderful album. The comparison to Joint Hands, it's like chalk and cheese. It's absolutely wonderful. Well worth having, picking up. I picked up a CD actually, never thinking I'd end up getting a vinyl copy, and then they followed it up with probably what I feel is their masterpiece, Juju, released in 1981. Reached number 7 in UK charts. This returned more. The synths took a back step, and the guitar came out in force. This is probably McGeoch's album. His style of playing was highly praised on the album. He used the gizmo that Godley and Cream had put together for their Consequences album. He used that on a couple of tracks. The band themselves considered this to be a sort of concept album. Sort of dark subjects were coming up, but the 2 hit singles on here, Spellbound, which I think Susie had put together some sort of like a waltz. McGeoch just turned it around, and the guitar on that is just wonderful. And then Arabian Nights is just wonderful. One of my favourite Susie and the Banshees singles. This is just absolute wonderful album. Well worth checking out. The first 4 Susie and the Banshees albums, you can't go wrong. And I have to say, I was very. I'll take it. I was very lucky to pick those up. Moving on to another band, Stranglers. Raven, which was released in 1979, was the 4th studio album, reached number 4 in the charts. Nothing to do with the Edgar Allan Poe. Raven sort of reflects a Norse mythology, and you see on the back cover the band on a longboat. But that wasn't just all about the album. On the album, other tracks sort of had different features. You got Ice, which was a song about Japanese ritual suicide. Don't Bring Harry, which was ode to heroin addiction. Shah Shah Go Go reflected the Iranian Revolution, and Genetics was about genetic engineering. The main hit single, was Duchess, and then Nuclear Device was another hit single as well. I personally feel this album was where the band was starting to change the sound. The bass line, particularly of John Jack Burnell, was softening a little bit. Wasn't as upfront as it once was. So yeah, it's a very pleasing album to have. I was pleased to have that. Sort of missing that one from my collection. Sometimes considered a masterpiece, but probably critically derided at the time. It was their 6th album, La Folie. Now, the title, La Folie, it just means madness in French, literally. This was the 6th album produced by Tony Visconti. They had moved to Liberty Records, but commercially, the band was in a bit of a slump. And Visconti's brief was to produce each song on the album as though it was going to be a potential hit single. I don't think he succeeded in that, and particularly when you think about the title track, which is La Folie. Now, this is based on the story of Izzy Sangawa, who was a Japanese student living in Paris, and he had dark thoughts. While he was there, he wanted to kill prostitutes and women. And one night he invited a Dutch student over for a meal, killed her. And apparently the shock of the fact he killed her, he fainted, and then woke up, realised what he'd done. Then he performed an act of necrophilia on her, and then he disposed of the body by basically chopping it up, cooking it, and eating her. For his pains, he was put in an asylum, and after a couple of years, he was released and sent back to Japan, where he became a bit of a minor celebrity. If you read about him, it's just absolutely... I don't know, it's fascinating. It's just bizarre, I think is the word. The big hit single on here was Golden Brown. It suddenly became a #2 hit single out of nowhere because it was totally different to what people suspected of the Stranglers with its harpsichord. Most people took it to be about heroin, though Hugh Cornwell said it was also about a girl. You could have a double meaning on the song. Because of the success of Golden Brown, this album peaked at #11 in the UK. And I know this has been a very long video. I've got one more record to show you. This is Talking Heads Remaining Light, the 4th studio album released in 1980, produced by Brian Eno. I think this represents a critical point for the band. Eno had worked with Byrne in My Life in the Bush of Ghosts. Harrison was producing Nora Hendrix. Tina Weymouth was very unhappy with the band. He was very unhappy with David Byrne's control over the band and wanted to leave the band. However, her husband, Chris France, didn't want to. So they went off to Bahamas just to try and patch things up, not so much about themselves, but have it reflect what needed to be done. And when they come back, it sort of reflects that the band wanted to get back together again and started working together. Eno was infused what was coming out. There were influences of African music, hip hop, tape loops. This album was just a mishmash of everything that was going wrong at the time. And basically, how the album came together, they jammed. The band jammed, and then just took out the bits they didn't want. However, the problems were occurring. Byrne was suffering from writer's block, and there were periods when Weymouth and France weren't coming into the studio. So Adrian Belew was brought in to provide lead guitars, the guitar solos. At the end of the album, Dave Byrne describes the final mix as a spiritual piece of work, joyous and ecstatic, and yet it is serious as well. 21 in the UK charts, #19 in the US charts. Everyone knows the best known song, which is Once in a Lifetime. This was going to be the original album art, but for some reason the record company didn't like it, so they went with that, and that was based on an idea by Tina Weymouth. So there you go, that's all 13 albums. Maybe the last couple were a bit rushed. So if you're new to my channel, you like what you see, click on the subscribe button. Thumbs up, thumbs down, love the interaction. So VC, until the next time, take care of yourselves, keep spinning, more importantly, keep smiling.